Control was never about love. It was always about silence, submission, and who flinched first. They didn't tell you this part, did they? That the real game was never about feelings. It was about control. The way they'd smile and withdraw. The way they'd go silent, not to heal, but to dominate. The way your reaction became their scoreboard. My friends, you thought it was about heartbreak, about miscommunication, about two people drifting apart. But what if I told you it was never about love? It was about power. And the moment you stopped reacting, the moment you went silent, you shattered the entire illusion. Hey folks, imagine this. You walk into a room and the person you once poured your soul into, they're sitting across from you, calm, unreadable, unfazed. You reach out, you speak, you try to explain, but there's no response. They're still, emotionless, silent. You start to panic. Why? Because silence doesn't just make people uncomfortable, it exposes them. That's what you've become. Not the chaos they expected, but the calm that ruins their performance. You were once a chess piece in their emotional game, but now you've left the board entirely. You see, control was always the goal. Not connection, not mutual respect. No, they wanted to know they could stir your heart with a text, that they could disappear and come back, and you'd still be there, waiting with open arms and shattered dignity. But when you went silent, truly silent, you took back the only thing they feared losing, influence. Because silence, my friends, isn't passive. It's not weakness. It's not avoidance. It's warfare without words. It's self-mastery in motion. It's you saying, I no longer dance to music I didn't choose. They told you silence is immature, that you should talk things out, be the bigger person. But what they really meant was, keep talking so I can keep pulling strings. And I say, no more. The moment you stop explaining yourself to someone who only listens to control you, is the moment you win. It's not about revenge. It's about resurrection and silence. That's where you're reborn. You ever seen a candle flame? It dances wildly when the wind is strong. But take away the air, and suddenly everything goes still. That's what happened when you stopped reacting. You became the stillness that suffocates their drama, the mystery that their ego can't solve, the void that echoes with everything they did wrong but can't admit. Let's break a lie wide open right now. They didn't walk away because you were too much. They walked away because they couldn't control you anymore. And your silence, that's the proof they never expected. Because it doesn't say, I'm waiting. It says, I'm done playing. This is your turning point, not a chapter break, a book burn. Let them wonder, let them scroll, let them try to decode the version of you that no longer responds. Because once you stop giving them emotional breadcrumbs to follow, you force them to face the hunger they created. So let's say it together. Drop it in the comments right now. Silence made me win. Press that like button if you're done being predictable and hit subscribe, because what's coming next? Oh, it's going to show you why your silence isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of your rise. Stay with me. Number 1. They didn't want love. They wanted leverage. If it was love, it wouldn't require control. Let that one sit for a second, because deep down you felt it. Something was off. They said the right words. They gave you just enough to stay hopeful. But behind every I miss you was a hook. Behind every emotional pull was a string. And while you were loving with your heart, they were playing with your reactions like a remote control. My friends, this wasn't love. It was leverage dressed in affection, a game of control disguised as connection. Picture this, a puppet show on a dimly lit stage. Every smile they gave you was scripted. Every pause, every withdrawal, every random silence, intentional. You thought you were building something real, but in truth, you were being trained, not loved, conditioned. Conditioned to react, conditioned to chase, conditioned to crave their crumbs as if they were gold. And when you finally stopped responding, the whole act fell apart. Now some of you might ask, but what if they really cared? And that's the hard part, isn't it? Because people can care and still manipulate. They can miss you and still try to control you. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Just because they cried doesn't mean they were honest. Just because they came back once doesn't mean they deserved another chance. And just because they said they loved you doesn't mean they knew how to love without control. Let's break the lie right now. Love does not mean sacrificing your peace just to keep someone else comfortable. It does not mean surrendering your boundaries so they feel powerful. If they needed you anxious to feel secure, that's not love, that's emotional dependency. If they kept you uncertain just to keep you hooked, that's not connection, that's control. And the moment you realize that, you change everything. They fed you this illusion, right? That if you just tried harder, if you just stayed longer, if you just understood them better, they'd finally show up for you. But every time you got closer, they pulled away. Every time you got strong, they poked your wounds. And it wasn't by accident, it was calculated chaos, because they didn't want a partner. They wanted a pawn. And then, something shifted in you. You stopped playing. You stopped justifying. You stopped explaining your worth to someone who only listened when they thought they were losing you. That silence, that's what cracked their mask. Because it wasn't just quiet, it was your refusal to be controlled any longer. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. Walking away from emotional manipulation feels like walking through fire barefoot. Every part of you screams to go back, to fix it, to explain yourself. You wonder, was it me? You second-guess your silence. You replay every moment, wondering if you were too harsh, too distant, too cold. But here's the truth, my friends. You weren't too much. You were finally enough for yourself. It's hard because they conditioned you to feel responsible for their emotions. They trained you to think that if they were upset, it must have been your fault. But now you see the truth. Their pain isn't your responsibility. Their silence isn't your punishment. It's their confusion that they can't control you anymore. Let that fuel your fire. Let that make you walk taller, not colder. Because when someone only loved you when they had leverage, they never really loved you. They loved the power they had over you. And now that it's gone, they're left with the truth they never expected. You don't need them to be whole. So here's what you do next. Don't explain. Don't defend. Don't lower yourself to be understood by someone who already decided not to see you clearly. Instead, rise silently. Let your peace be the loudest thing they never expected. Let your boundaries speak louder than your voice ever did. Say this with me. Comment it. Own it. Feel it in your bones. I took back my power. Show them. Show yourself. Show the world around you that you're no longer playing the game. You're rewriting the rules. Hit that like button if you've ever felt used, and subscribe, because what's coming next? We're going even deeper into how silence didn't just protect you, it exposed them. Stay close, my friends. We're just warming up. Number 2, your reactions were their fuel. They didn't need your love. They needed your reaction, because your emotions were their power source. My friends, let's not sugarcoat this. The love you gave, that was real. But what they needed wasn't your love. It was your reaction, your emotion, your pain, your spark. The way your heart raced when they pulled away. The way your voice cracked when you tried to make it right. That wasn't just coincidence. That was fuel, and they thrived on it like oxygen in a fire. Imagine this, a magician on stage. Their tricks only work when there's a crowd. The gasps, the applause, the eyes wide open in suspense. That's what makes the illusion come alive. But take away the audience, no spotlight, no claps, no reactions. Suddenly the magic dies. That's what happens when you stop reacting. The illusion breaks. The spell lifts. The game ends, not with a bang, but with deafening silence. And here's the hard truth. They never wanted peace. They wanted control disguised as conversation. They didn't want clarity. They wanted chaos, because chaos gives them leverage. Every time you cried, they felt powerful. Every time you sent another paragraph, they smiled behind the screen. Every time you got emotional, it reassured them that they still mattered. Not in your heart, but in your mind. That they still had access. That you were still theirs to stir. Now you might ask yourself, why would someone want to hurt me just to feel powerful? Because they were never trying to love you. They were trying to own the effect they had on you. That's the difference. Love says, I want you to be happy even if it's not with me. Control says, I want you to hurt if I'm not in control of you. And you, my friend, were the fire they kept testing just to make sure it still burned when they touched it. But not anymore. Because the day you went silent, the day you refused to give them a single spark, that was the day the lights went out on their little stage show. No texts, no calls, no reactions, nothing for them to feed on. And suddenly, they're not the confident puppet master they pretended to be. They're left with their own echo, their own emptiness, their own consequences. Let me tell you something heavy. Some people don't miss you. They miss how it felt to be needed by you. And when that need disappears, when you stop jumping at every breadcrumb, they spiral. Not because they lost you, but because they lost access to your energy. It's not easy, though. Let's be honest, holding back your reaction when your heart is screaming to reach out. That's war. It's like standing still in the middle of a storm while your past throws everything it has at you. Your mind says, just one message, just one call, just one last explanation. But you know better now, because that one message becomes a crack in the dam. And they'll walk right through it, smiling, sweet, apologetic, until they feel your emotions rise again, and just like that, they'll take your power back into their hands. That's why silence is not weakness. It's discipline. It's refusing to be baited. It's stoic fire, not wild flames, but a slow, contained burn that can melt steel without saying a word. And guess what happens when you master this? You stop being their emotional mirror. You stop reflecting their damage. You become still, unreadable, unshakable. You become the one they can't figure out anymore. And that terrifies them. Because predictable people are easy to manipulate. But silent people, stoic people, that's a different league. They expect drama. You gave them distance. They expected emotion. You gave them emptiness. They expected to matter forever. You reminded them they were just a moment. So let them sit in the silence. Let them search for the reaction that isn't coming. Let them refresh their messages. Let them dig through your past, trying to understand where they lost the leash. You don't need to scream. You don't need to explain. You just need to hold the line. Hold your peace. Hold your dignity. Because every moment you stay silent, that's a moment you get stronger and they get weaker. Say it with me. Drop it in the comments right now. I no longer react. Show them. Show yourself. Show the world that your peace is no longer up for grabs. Smash that like button if you've decided to cut the emotional cord. Subscribe, because up next, We're going to talk about what happens when the illusion starts to crumble and your silence becomes the mirror they can't escape. Stay with me. Number 3. Silence didn't just starve them. It starved their illusion. They weren't addicted to your presence. They were addicted to the story your reactions allowed them to believe. This is where it gets brutal, my friends, because silence doesn't just make them miss you. It makes the lie they were living collapse. You weren't just food for their ego. You were the mirror that kept their illusion intact. And the second you went quiet, the mask cracked, the fantasy folded, the story they told themselves, the one where they were the hero and you were the one who could never let go. It started starving, and without your emotional reactions to keep it alive, it died. Let me paint it for you. Imagine someone building a house made of fog, beautiful from a distance, intricate, dreamy, but it only stands as long as the wind doesn't blow, and then one day you exhale. Just one strong, intentional breath. Silence. Detachment. No reply. No validation. No more explaining. And the whole thing? It vanishes. Just like that. See, they didn't just feed off your attention. They fed off the illusion that they were still in control, that if they came back, you'd answer, that if they pulled away, you'd chase, that your emotions would always be available on demand, like a show they could rewatch anytime they got bored. But your silence, it cancelled the season finale. It unplugged the TV. It left them staring at a blank screen with no closure and no reruns. And now they're left with the most dangerous thing you could ever give someone who played with your heart: their own thoughts. Because silence, my friends, is not empty. It's full. Full of weight. Full of truth. Full of everything they didn't want to face when they thought they were winning. Your silence stripped away the background music they used to drown out their guilt. It stopped the applause. It killed the laugh track. Now it's just them. And what they did, and that is terrifying. They expected you to fold. They expected you to explain. They expected you to fight for the connection. And when none of that happened, the story they built in their mind, the one where they were always the one with the upper hand, began to rot. Slowly. Painfully. Because when you stop reacting, they start realizing. Maybe they didn't matter as much as they told themselves they did. Now they ask, why didn't they chase? Why did they go quiet so easily? Did I mean anything at all? And that, right there, is where the panic begins. Because silence starves the illusion and feeds reality. And the reality is, they lost access to someone who gave them more grace than they ever deserved. Let's break the lie right here. Silence isn't childish. It's not petty. It's not immature. That's what they want you to believe. Because if they can make you feel guilty for going quiet, maybe you'll break the silence. Maybe you'll fall back into their cycle. Maybe you'll respond just one more time so they can keep the illusion alive. But you won't. Not this time. Because now you know. Every time you reacted, you were feeding the beast. You were breathing life into a story that was only written to benefit them. Every text, every argument, every emotional reply. You weren't expressing yourself. You were handing them the pen to write your narrative for you. But silence, that was you grabbing the pen back, tearing out the old pages, and starting over. A story where you're not begging to be seen, you are seen by yourself, by your future, by your healed self that no longer needs to be understood by people who built castles out of lies and crowned themselves kings of manipulation. It's not easy. I know that. Some days the silence feels heavier than words ever did. Some nights you want to scream into the void, just to feel something echo back. But remember this. Your silence is your power. It's not the absence of communication, it's the beginning of transformation. So hold the line. Let them starve. Let the illusion starve. Let their fake narrative suffocate without your energy. Because the longer you stay silent, the more they're forced to sit with reality. And reality doesn't have a filter. Say it with me. Drop this in the comments right now. My silence starved the lie. Show them. Show yourself. Show the world you're not afraid to be the one who walks away without a script. Hit that like button if you're done feeding illusions. Subscribe and stay close, because next we're going to talk about how silence didn't just break the narrative, it flipped the power. And my friends, that's when the real shift begins. Number 4, you flipped the power without saying a word. The loudest move you'll ever make is the one where you say nothing at all. They thought silence meant you gave up, that you had nothing left to say. But oh, my friends, if only they knew. That silence, that wasn't surrender. That was a strategy. That was you flipping the entire power dynamic without a single word, without raising your voice, without even looking back. While they were waiting for the drama, for the response, for the final scene, you walked out of the theater. And they're still standing on the stage, confused, talking to an audience that no longer exists. You want to know how you win a war without ever stepping onto the battlefield. You stop showing up for their chaos. You stop explaining. You stop justifying. You stop performing in a script that was never written for your healing, only for their control. They expected a fight, and instead you gave them stillness. And in that stillness, you did something they didn't plan for. You reclaimed your power. Imagine this. 2 armies lined up across a battlefield, one side armored, loud, shouting insults, waving weapons. The other side, silent. Not because they're scared, but because they're done. Because they realized the battlefield itself was a trap. And instead of charging forward, they stepped back, quietly, strategically, letting the opponent waste their energy swinging at the air. That's what your silence did. You stopped playing the part they needed to feel powerful, and suddenly they didn't know how to play the game anymore. You see, people who thrive on control rely on one thing: your predictability, your responses, your need to explain, defend, and react. Every time you speak, they measure it. Every time you reply, they calculate their next move. It's not love, it's leverage. And they never expected you to remove yourself from the equation. They never expected you to stop being the emotional supplier. But when you did, everything shifted. Now they're spinning, wondering, why are they so calm? Why didn't they reply? Are they done? Or are they playing me? And the irony? You're not playing anything. You're healing, you're rebuilding, you're realigning. But to someone who always needed to know what you're feeling to feel secure about themselves, your silence becomes the scariest thing they've ever faced. Let's break the lie wide open. They told you that being the bigger person means talking things through, that if you really cared, you'd stay and explain. But what they really wanted was access, not accountability. They didn't want resolution, they wanted continuation. They didn't want truth, they wanted control of the narrative. But when you go silent, when you don't even hand them the privilege of your final words, you take all of that away. And let's be honest, it's hard, especially if you were someone who always had something to say. If you were the one who believed communication could fix everything. If you were the one who wore your heart on your sleeve, hoping they'd finally see it and handle it with care. But eventually you realized you were writing letters to someone who never intended to read them. And that's when the real you stepped forward. The you that doesn't explain your value. The you that doesn't beg to be heard. The you that understands silence isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of self-respect. And that, right there, is what flipped the power. Not the silence itself, but what the silence represented. It was proof that you no longer need to be understood to feel whole. It was evidence that you can walk away from something that once consumed your every thought and feel peace instead of panic. You didn't just go quiet, you grew. You didn't just stop talking, you started building. And while they're still trying to figure out how to pull you back into the game, you've already left the room and locked the door behind you. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's not retreat. That's rise. So here's your reminder. You don't have to make noise to make impact. You don't have to argue to prove your worth. You don't have to react to show you care. Sometimes the most powerful move you'll ever make is the one where you do nothing. Say it out loud. Drop it in the comments right now. My silence flipped the power. Show them, show yourself, show the world that you don't need to speak to be heard. Smash that like button if you've taken your voice back by using your silence. And subscribe, because next we're going to reveal what happens when your absence becomes their obsession. And trust me, folks, that's when it really starts to hurt them. Stay with me. Number 5. Control was the drug. Your absence became withdrawal. They weren't scared of losing you. They were scared of losing their fix. Let's tell the truth, my friends, because it's time someone did. They didn't crave your love. They craved your reaction. They didn't need you. They needed your energy. You weren't their partner. You were their supplier. And what they were addicted to wasn't intimacy, honesty, or connection. It was control. That was their drug of choice. The rush of knowing you'd always respond. The high they got when you reached out first. The ego hit they took when you broke silence just to get closure they never intended to give. That, right there, was the addiction. But here's where everything flipped. You walked away, not with a tantrum, not with a dramatic final text, but with silence. You went cold turkey on giving them what they craved most, emotional leverage. And that, my friends, is when the withdrawal kicked in. You see, the moment they couldn't access your emotions anymore, the moment they realized their little tricks stopped working, they didn't just miss you. They started craving you, not because they loved you, but because they couldn't control you anymore. Imagine a gambler who always wins because the game is rigged in their favor. Every time they pull the lever, they get a prize. And then suddenly, nothing, no bells, no lights, no payout, just silence, just a dead machine. That's what your absence became, a cut supply, a broken pattern, a withdrawal they never prepared for because they were always too high on their own illusion of power. And let me tell you something real, they spiraled. Quietly, of course. You won't see it on their Instagram. They'll post like they're thriving, like nothing phases them. But behind the scenes, they're checking your page in the dark. They're rereading your last words. They're wondering if you're really gone or just waiting. Because your silence doesn't confirm closure, it creates confusion. And to someone addicted to control, confusion is torture. Now here's the lie they'll feed you later if they get the chance. I just needed space. I didn't know what I wanted. It was all moving too fast. Nah, that's not the truth. What really happened was this. They thought you'd always be available. They thought they could come back whenever they wanted. That no matter how they treated you, they'd still get a reaction. But instead of a reaction, they got emptiness. Instead of a fight, they got quiet. And that quiet, it hit harder than anything you could have said. And yes, it's hard. Because sometimes you still want to reach out, not to chase, but just to show them you're okay, just to prove they didn't break you. But here's the twist. They want that. Not because they care, but because it gives them another hit of control, another fix, another signal that your emotional energy still bends around their gravity, that you still orbit them, even in silence. But you don't. Not anymore. Because you finally saw it for what it was. They weren't in love with you. They were in love with how much of you they could manipulate. And once you cut the cord, once you stopped feeding the system, they were left with the one thing they never wanted to face, their own emptiness. This is the part where most people fold. They feel guilty. They question themselves. Am I being too harsh? Am I really healing or just avoiding? But let me ask you this. Did they ever question the way they treated you when they had your heart in their hands? Exactly. Your silence isn't revenge. It's recovery. It's you stepping out of the cycle and refusing to be their emotional dealer anymore. You're not punishing them. You're preserving yourself. You're detoxing your life from the poison of performance-based love. Let them shake. Let them itch. Let them scroll in circles, trying to decode the silence that once would have broken you. They're not chasing love. They're chasing the control they lost when you finally chose peace over chaos. Say it with me now. Drop this in the comments. They're addicted to control. I chose clarity. Show them. Show yourself. Show the world around you that you don't serve people who only know how to love through leverage. Smash that like button if you're done being someone's emotional crutch. Subscribe and stay close, because next we're going to talk about what happens when your silence stops being a boundary and becomes the mirror they can't look away from. Stay with me. Number 6. The less you responded, the more they unraveled. They didn't fall apart when you argued. They fell apart when you didn't. You want to know the real moment they started to lose it? It wasn't when you blocked them. It wasn't when you said goodbye. It wasn't even when you told them you were done. No, my friends, the moment they really started unraveling was when you went quiet, when you didn't explain, when you didn't react, when you didn't do what you always did, respond. Because here's the truth. They weren't addicted to connection. They were addicted to your response. Every word you gave them was proof they still had space in your mind. Every reaction was a reminder that they still had influence. And once that stopped, once your screen stayed black, your typing bubble never appeared, your name stopped popping up, that's when the unraveling began. Not loudly, quietly, slowly. In the way panic creeps in when the air gets thinner. Imagine this. A spider sitting in the center of its web, confident, proud, waiting. For weeks, months, it knew exactly how to catch you. One message here, one like there, one breadcrumb at just the right time, and you'd come crawling back into the trap. But this time, you don't come back. You don't even check the web. You're just gone. And that web? It starts to collapse. Not because you broke it, but because you stopped feeding it. That's what happened when you stopped responding. Their entire emotional strategy, built on your predictability, your kindness, your willingness to keep the peace, started falling apart. And you didn't need to yell. You didn't need to curse. You didn't need to post cryptic quotes. You just needed to stay quiet. They thought you were emotional. They thought you were weak. They thought silence would never be your move. But Stoicism, my friends, is about mastering that exact storm. The fire still burns in your chest, but you don't throw it around recklessly anymore. You let it shape you, harden you, refine you. And to them, that's terrifying, because they're not used to you being unreadable. They're used to the version of you who'd always fold first. But this version, this one stays still. And stillness, when it's unexpected, drives manipulators insane. Because stillness says, I'm not fighting for you, I'm fighting for me. It says, I'm not explaining myself to someone who already decided not to understand me. It says, I've given enough. I'm done bleeding for people who think pain is a game. Now let's be real. Staying silent doesn't mean you don't hurt. There are nights you'll want to send that message. Mornings you'll wake up hoping to see their name. You'll doubt yourself. You'll wonder if staying silent is making you cold. But here's the truth. You're not being cold. You're being clear. Because every time you respond, you open the door just enough for them to slip back in. And every time they slip back in, they reset the cycle. Hurt, hope, repeat. But when you stay silent, when you let them feel the consequences in the quiet, that's when they finally face themselves. That's when the power flips. And here's the twist. They won't tell you they're unraveling. They'll act fine. They'll post selfies, share stories, pretend like they're unbothered. But that silence you gave them, it's living rent-free in their mind. It's echoing louder than any paragraph ever could. Because now, they have questions. Why didn't they respond? Did I lose them for real? Are they already with someone else? And every day you stay silent, the fear grows louder. You're not trying to punish them. You're not trying to get even. You're just done. Done reacting, done explaining, done playing the emotional yo-yo for someone who only pulled you close just to push you away again. And that right there is the moment they lose the control they once had over your peace. So let them unravel. Let them wonder. Let them try to figure you out while you're busy building a life they no longer get to witness. You don't need to say anything because silence is its own language. It says, I'm not available to the version of you that couldn't value me. Say it loud. Drop it in the comments right now. I let them unravel. Show them. Show yourself. Show the world that you don't break just because someone expects you to. Smash that like button if you've decided to protect your peace with your silence. Subscribe, because next, we're revealing how your silence didn't just shake their illusion, it became your rebirth. And folks, that's when your story starts to shift forever. Stay with me. Number 7. They thought it was a game. You turned it into growth. They wanted to play you, but instead, they watched you evolve into someone they could never touch again. Here's the punchline they never expected, my friends. The game they were playing? You didn't just quit. You outgrew it. They thought they were baiting you, pulling your strings, keeping you close just enough to never fully lose you. They fed off your reactions, your confusion, your emotional availability like it was a sport. And you were the predictable player in their little game. Until one day, you weren't. You stopped replying, you stopped explaining, you stopped fighting for clarity in a room full of noise. And that wasn't weakness, that was your awakening. Because somewhere along the line you realized this wasn't about love, it was about control. And when you saw the pattern, the manipulation, the way they used uncertainty like a leash, you broke it. Not with a scream, not with a final message, but with silence. Let me paint it for you. Imagine someone throwing stones into a lake. They watch the ripples. That's how they feel power. Each reaction, a ripple. Each tear, a ripple. Each argument, each breakdown, every text you sent, more ripples. But what happens when the water goes still? What happens when the stones stop making waves? That's what your silence did. You didn't just refuse to play the game, you drained the entire lake. They wanted ego boosts. You chose evolution. They wanted attention. You chose alignment. They wanted to win a power struggle. You decided to walk into peace. And yes, it hurt. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Growth isn't glamorous. You don't wake up one day unbothered. No, you wake up aching, missing them, wanting closure, wanting answers. But then you remember the version of you that tolerated their games. That version is gone, buried in the silence, replaced by someone who's building a life that doesn't rely on breadcrumbs, second guesses, or emotional roulette. Let's break this lie they told you, that silence means you're bitter, that not responding is petty, that moving on without a monologue makes you the villain. That's their guilt talking. Because people who benefited from your confusion will always villainize your clarity. People who controlled your reactions will always feel attacked by your stillness. But don't shrink. Don't explain. Don't walk back into the ring just because they pretend they've changed. You've already won. Not because you hurt them, not because you got revenge, but because you outgrew the version of you who needed their validation to feel worthy. You took the pain, and you planted it, watered it, nurtured it, let it grow into boundaries, standards, and self-respect. While they were waiting for your reaction, you were rewriting your identity. While they were checking if you'd still check their stories, you were learning how to tell your own. And now the shift is obvious. You don't reply out of impulse anymore. You don't question your silence. You don't explain yourself to someone who can't even face their own reflection. You've gone from being emotionally available to emotionally elevated. And let's be honest, they feel it. Even if they never say a word, they feel the distance. They feel the disconnection. They feel that you no longer orbit their world. And what they thought was a break, what they assumed was a pause, has now become permanent. They thought they were playing chess, that they'd make a move and watch you react. But instead they looked up and realized, you're not even on the board anymore. You're not a piece in their game. You're not playing. You're building, quietly, powerfully, consistently. And here's where it gets beautiful. Your silence didn't just confuse them. It inspired you. It reminded you who you are without their presence clouding your vision. It gave you space to remember what peace feels like, what clarity sounds like, what growth demands. So don't go back, don't reach out, don't water the same tree that bore rotten fruit. Let it go. Let them think whatever they want. Because while they're stuck in old games, you're walking into a new life, with new rules, new strength, and a new identity. Number 8. Control was their game, but mastery was your move. The most dangerous person is not the one who fights back. It's the one who no longer reacts. They thought they had it all figured out, that pulling away would make you chase, that silence from them would spark chaos in you, that you'd bend, break, or beg just to feel seen again. Because for them, control was the only language they knew. They didn't want to understand you. They wanted to manage you. And the moment they couldn't, that's when they started to realize the game they were playing, you outgrew it. Control was their weapon. Silence was yours. But unlike them, you didn't use silence to confuse, punish, or manipulate. You used it to rise. Because real power isn't in domination, it's in discipline. You didn't just walk away. You reclaimed yourself. You didn't flinch. You didn't fold. You let their chaos pass through you like wind through a mountain, unshaken, unbothered, unmoved. They thought they were leading. But all along, they were just reacting to your old patterns. When you stopped those patterns, when you stepped out of the frame, they had nothing left to push against, no buttons to press, no script to control. And that's what scared them, not your silence, but your mastery. You see, mastery isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just moves different. It doesn't chase. It doesn't need to be seen to feel valid. It chooses peace over performance, growth over ego, boundaries over bait. And while they were still trying to measure power in responses and reactions, you were mastering the one thing they couldn't, yourself. That's why they lost. Not because you shouted, not because you slammed the door, but because you didn't need to. And here's the truth, my friends. When someone plays for control and loses it, they crumble. But when someone builds self-mastery and claims it, they evolve. And that's exactly what you did. While they were playing checkers, you were learning chess, quietly, strategically, powerfully. So let them talk. Let them guess. Let them wonder what happened to the version of you they could once pull like a puppet. That version doesn't live here anymore. The one who replaced them? That one moves in silence, holds the throne, and never steps off it to prove a point. Write this right now in the comments. I mastered myself. Show them. Show yourself. Show the world that you don't need control over others to feel powerful. You need control over yourself. Smash that like button if you've chosen mastery over madness.